Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook live broadcast. I'm Steve Altition, Director of Client Partnerships here at Pacific Cascade Legal. And today we have our firm attorney, Alicia Doling, to talk about creating the right parenting plan to fit your needs. So, Alicia, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing well. I love that we're talking about this, and I really love that you like to talk about this because this can
Yes.
be really confusing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
And so let's start with sort of the what I call my 101 question. What is a parenting plan and why is it important to have a good one?
Yeah, so a parenting plan is the framework for what the parents' parental responsibilities and parenting time regarding their children are, how they share it, all of that information. And it can be an agreement. It can also come through the court ordering it if your case goes to trial. It's always better to have an agreement, but obviously that's not always possible. So the very basics that are necessary in the parenting plan is who gets to make um, decisions regarding the child or the children, and that's what we call legal custody, which we'll get into later. And the how the child is spending their time with each parent, what that looks like, what that schedule is. But that's the very basics.
Yeah.
Um, the plan is not, if you're in a divorce, and you're trying to deal with separating, assets and property, the parenting plan is not going to deal with that. The parenting plan itself also doesn't deal with child support. That is closely tied to it and is going to depend on what the parenting plan is, but they're not together. The parenting plan is going to be custody and and what we call parenting time. How the kid is who's deciding what for the child and where the child is going to be and how they spend their time.
I love that. So I just want to make this clear for me. A parenting plan is at least it is has to happen if you have kids. I mean, it can be, like you said, very minimal, but it has to happen. So my thought
Yes.
always is if it's going to happen anyway, try to do it together and not make the judge decide because that's never a good thing.
No, yeah,
And,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, and so let's talk about the best interest of the child because if the judge were to do it, that would probably be a term they use 50 times in trying to figure it out. So
Yes.
let's kind of talk about what the best interests of the child mean and and how they would fit into a parenting plan and why it's important to consider that.
Yeah. So, we'll kind of focus more on like the colloquial sort of understanding of the best interests of the child. It's it sounds like it would be really simple to think about, but there's a lot to consider, which is, their physical needs, where they're living, if they have a bed in each home, if they're able to get food at each home or, wherever they're staying, their clothing, getting to school, etc. But it's also considering their emotional needs. So if they're being able, if the schedule, the agreement, whatever the plan, is able to provide them with a sense um, of safety and and comfort, and also their emotional needs in terms of their parents, being able to have healthy relationships with both parents and being able to maintain those. And so, it's considering all of that. That's sort of,
Yeah.
what situation is going to be able to best serve the child in all of those aspects.
It sounds like unfortunately in a lot of divorces on all the issues that the parents may not agree. and have vastly different, ideas of what they want to have happen. But it seems almost especially important that in this, it's not a winning or losing. It's not a fight to the death. You really need to try to work something out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's, I always think in family law, there's no winners and there's no losers. And a parenting plan is a huge example of that. The most important thing is going to be what is best for the child. It doesn't matter if you as the parent feel like it's fair or if you're winning. It's what is important is the child being served. And so yeah, definitely um in that way it is best to come up with an agreement because as the parents you know your child, you know what's in their best interests.
And that doesn't mean that it's not, there are interests for each of the parents. I mean, because,
No.
some parents have different work schedules, some parents, live in a weird place, a far place. I mean, those things are to consider as well. It just don't, they aren't necessarily the end all be all of how it's run.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of looking at everything together,
Yeah.
and figuring out what's best for the child based on what's going on and what is reasonable and what's actually able to happen.
Right. So you talked about a little bit about what kind of goes into it, and we talked for a couple of minutes about legal custody and physical custody, and joint legal custody. What that kind of really means, because again, I think people think legal custody maybe means, oh, I get the kid the whole time.
Yeah, so I think it's really confusing, I mean, there's a lot of confusing things about law, but
Yes, there are.
the colloquial terms versus what the legal terms are can be really confusing. And so for legal custody, it's just about who is making important major life decisions for the child. And so that includes stuff like the child's education, where do they go to school, the child's medical care, their religion, and sort of their cultural practices, cultural norms. With legal custody, the options are one parent can have sole legal custody, which means that that parent who is given sole legal custody is making all of the decisions. That doesn't mean that the other parent isn't involved. It just means that if for some reason the parents don't agree or aren't able to come to an agreement about those decisions, then the parent with sole legal custody is the one to make that decision. Then there's joint legal custody, which in Oregon is only possible if the parents agree that they can share joint legal custody. And so with joint legal custody, the parents both have to collaborate and communicate with each other and come to an agreement on all of these major decisions. And then if they're not able to, then typically there are, with a very robust parenting plan, there are sort of provisions in order to help with that decision making if for some reason there's an issue that they're just not agreeing on.
Yeah. And the joint custody thing is interesting because I know also talk to people and who sort of assume that if we have joint custody, that means the kids live with me half the time and you half the time. And
Yeah,
that's not necessarily what that means, is it?
no, no, not at all. Joint, like the custody part of it, the legal custody is separate from the parenting time. And so that's kind of why, you'll hear a lot of legal professionals call it parenting time versus, custody or physical custody, because it just gets
Right.
so confusing.
It is.
So yeah, whatever happens with, custody is not gonna directly impact necessarily. I mean, it has an impact, but it doesn't mean, if you have joint legal custody, you don't have to do 50-50 parenting time. It can look like however you want, whatever is, again, in the best interest of the child.
So that kind of leads to parenting plans. And sort of the two ends of the spectrum seem to be that it's either going to be 50-50 or you get them on the weekend.
That's
And
not,
yeah,
yeah,
more flexible than that, isn't it?
it is absolutely more flexible, especially if you come to an agreement. Obviously, it depends on how old your child is, sort of, what's been happening. But if you come to an agreement, you can do whatever you want with your parenting time plan. It doesn't have to necessarily be like a week on, week off. It doesn't have to be like, parent A only sees the kid on the weekends or every other weekend. There's so many different options, so many different ways to divide parenting time. It is whatever works best for the child. And again, it's important and is the priority to think about what is best for the child. For, in terms of, 50-50 custody, or not custody, sorry, 50-50 parenting time. See, it's so confusing.
Yeah.
It's, again, it doesn't have to be week on, week off. There's a number of different options. We call them like a 3-3-4-4 plan, which is parent A has 3 days, parent B has 3 days with the child, and then parent A has 4 days, parent B has 4 days, and then it's just a cycle. It's like a 2-week cycle. There's also the 2-2-5-5, which is similar. Or, depending on what it is, I know I haven't seen this in practice yet, but just in personal experience, I've seen it where just a kid at my school spent half the year with his dad and half the year with his mom. Whatever works for you, whatever works and is best for your child. And in terms of, you can get creative, and it's also really important to consider sort of what time of day like exchanges are. When one parent will drop off the child, or vice versa, or picking them up from school. And one thing that a lot of people don't really think about with parenting time, that I think is always really important, is holidays and vacations.
Yeah.
Um, it is, it is so important to consider sort of what is going to happen, when the kid is out of school, if they're school age, or on special holidays, whatever that may be for you and your family, because you don't want to have to, you don't want to have to like argue about it every single time.
Yeah.
Um, and that's sort of what's really important about a parenting plan, and especially having a detailed parenting plan. Even if you and the other parent are getting along really well, and like historically, co-parenting relationship has been really fantastic. And so you go into creating a parenting plan and feel like it's sort of like, well, it can be whatever. Unfortunately, you don't know what's going to happen down the road. And having that detailed parenting plan really helps, because it's sort of like the default.
Yeah.
If you are not able to agree, or if something happens, you're able to look at this and be like, look, we can't come to an agreement right now. Let's just follow the parenting plan. And that way everything is detailed, everything is lined up. And it really reduces any conflict, any stress on the child for figuring out what to do.
Is is there a hierarchy in parenting time days when they're with one parent or the other? And what I mean by that is, what happens if a holiday falls on the other person's normal day, or summer vacation that you're supposed to have for 2 weeks, a holiday falls there. Is can you kind of is there like a hierarchy you have to follow, or is that something that can be negotiated and put in a parenting plan?
It can absolutely be negotiated and put in a parenting plan. typically the hierarchy is if it's not in the parenting plan, it's going to be what's the normal schedule is. So if your parenting plan just says, parent A has weekends, parent B has Monday through Friday, then okay, well, if holidays all fall on the weekends, well then parent A gets all those holidays. Unless you and parent, each parent can speak with each other and agree. And so the parenting plan can discuss that. It can make provisions, if you don't want to go through every single holiday in a year, and there are a lot, so I understand. If you don't want to have to directly discuss each and every one of them, then the parenting plan can say, okay, well, it's going to be based on this hierarchy, or every other year or something like that. So if you come to an agreement, that's really helpful because then you can decide how that works. The court is going to be a lot less detailed about going through all those holidays.
Yeah.
Depends on the judge, depends on the situation, depends on how much judicial time you have. But it really, really depends. And so that's especially why it's so helpful to come to an agreement and create a parenting plan together.
I like it. Yeah, it just makes such good sense because I mean, trying to do the negotiations after the decree is signed, never works out really great.
No,
I mean, it's great if you can, but a lot of people can't. And so having that fallback works.
absolutely, absolutely.
You know, and this can change, I think you said. The
Yes.
the days, especially, it's probably a different parenting plan for a 6-month old than a 4-year-old than a junior in high school.
Yeah, it's really easy to kind of, think, okay, this is just now that it's official, it's signed by a judge and everything. This is the only thing that's going to happen. But life happens. Kids grow older, especially if you're starting with a really young kid. And so it is really important to be flexible. And it's also important to consider that things will change. And so what's really helpful in coming to an agreement is making those extra provisions about what to do as things change.
Yeah.
So, how you and the other parent are going to agree on changes or agree on whether it has to be like an official judgment or if it can just be like a written down agreement, however that is really helpful because I think the biggest thing is you don't want to have to go to a judge every single time that uh, there's an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And before we just kind of leave the parenting time thing, I just kind of want to throw out what a lot of people think. There is not a magic age, well, unless they be 18 years old, that, kids can decide who they want to live with.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
no, it's there's not a magic age. It really depends on the child. There are and it depends on, you know, um your also, your relationship as the parent with the child, what the child is communicating to you, etc. It's really important to consider that and to remember at the forefront that one of the big aspects of what's in the best interest of the child is to have a relationship with both parents, and making sure that that is a healthy relationship and that it's fostered and nurtured. So, the child, if you want the child to have input, you know, I would be it's definitely a tricky situation for sure. And I think it really just depends on the situation and
yeah, no,
what you
that makes
feel.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Best interest of the child, clearly the kind of driving most important thing. But I think number two just may be also trying to prevent conflict between
Yes.
the co-parents. And this is where stuff like, who does the transportation? What time is it? How is it done? What happens if someone's like, I mean, that whole kind of thing, a lot of times is you don't find in those, and they can be the biggest bones of contention.
Yeah, yeah. And so, that's part of what the parenting plan can do is adding provisions about, you know, um, where pickups or drop-offs happen, what time they happen, what happens if a parent is late or early, um, how emergency situations are handled and communicated to the other parent. One of the things that I think is really important is including provisions about how the parents communicate with each other, and how to handle that sort of communication, even like the method of communication, depending on the situation. And so a parenting plan and I absolutely wholeheartedly believe should include as many detailed provisions, in order to just reduce conflict as much as possible.
Yeah. That whole communication thing is interesting because if they don't end up agreeing and they do have to go to court and it's there's nothing really in writing as to what, has been going on, that's going to just make it harder for the judge. And, you can say, well, I've talked about this 20 times, but okay, show me.
Yeah,
Um, it kind of leads to that. I mean, are there certain ways that seem to be better at communication than others? Or, I use the term because, I hardly know what it means, apps that can be used. Is there ways to make that easier for the parents to communicate?
absolutely. There's an app for everything now.
Mhm.
One of my favorite apps that I recommend to most of my clients is Our Family Wizard. It's a communication tool. It's really helpful because the each parent can see, like, read receipts, so if it's been read. It also integrates like a calendar. There's a tool that is really helpful in really sort of more contentious co-parenting relationships, where it has like a tone meter, and can let you know if the message is potentially a little bit heated, to put it nicely, and to kind of uh, make you stop and think and reword what you're saying. So that one's really helpful. I think, it really does depend. Every lawyer says it, it depends. It really just depends on the situation and what's how you and the other parent feel most comfortable communicating with each other.
Well, and that leads back to, like you said, the situation. I mean, it can go from being very amicable and they work together and they got their everything going to, restraining orders and everything else. I mean, a parenting plan, it sounds like from what you're saying and all the things you can put in it, you can have one for all those situations. So it's not like just throw up your hands and let the judge decide. You can. I mean, it sounds like you can actually craft one for every situation.
Absolutely. And on top of that, too, is you can craft provisions, so that when there are issues, I think I mentioned it before, just how to come to an agreement. And
Yeah.
so one of the provisions that I love putting in parenting plans is that any disagreements that, parties aren't able to resolve on their own, instead of immediately going to a judge, is to do mediation.
Right.
That way, it sort of it just helps you not have to go back to court all the time.
Right. Right.
But it could be any number of things. If you wanted to, you could put in that you flip a coin. I don't recommend that, but
No, I
it's
never won a coin toss.
yeah, you can do what you want, which
How
is the
about
beauty.
changing plans? This this
Yes.
this could be such a sticky situation because again, talk people and it's like, well, the parenting plan is just, but we've been doing that. And that's okay. We've been doing that. And then, come back. Oh, they decide they want to go back. They can't go back. And I mean, the parenting plan is in writing. It's part of the decree. So it's really an order. Isn't that true?
It is true. It is part of the decree. It's part of the order. But again, you can add provisions that help you be able to change things, whether temporarily or permanently, just based on the situation, And including that language is really helpful because if it's something like, like one day, like,
Yeah.
parent A has an event and can't have the child overnight, then do you want to have to go back to court on that? No, you can, you just want to be able to talk about it or communicate. And so you can, just depending on your comfort and how you feel, you can say that, just any changes are, any temporary changes are okay, whatever form they're in, or, anything has to be in writing, or, if it's, you know, it could also just be that it has to go to the court. It has to be a modification proceeding, but there are options. Again, there's always options.
Yeah. Well, like always, we just blasted through the amount of time. It
Yeah.
way too short of time to talk about this. And I'd love to talk about some more stuff about parenting plans. But I don't before we do go, um, I want to know if there's, if you have someone sitting in front of you and they're, talking about, parenting plans and why do I need a parenting plan and what, is there something like a takeaway that you would give someone to think about parenting plans, not just making them, but as they go on, because they're going to last for years.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to remember who this is for, and who this is for your child. Um, that child should always be the focus. Their best interest should be the focus. And I think that's the most important thing, regardless of, I mean, I think this should be the most important thing for just thinking about like a parenting situation in general. It's all going to be
Yep.
about your child.
Yep. I love that. I love that. Well, we are unfortunately now out of time. So thank you so much for being here today. This was
Absolutely.
really wonderful. You talk about co-parenting, parenting plans, and all of that stuff in a way that even I can understand it. So that's wonderful. So thank you very much for being here.
Absolutely. It was wonderful to be here.
Oh, good. And everyone else, thank you for joining us today. If anyone has any further questions on today's topic, you can post it here. You can call us and we can get you connected with an attorney. And with that, stay safe,